Welcome friends to another 40k video. Today we look to Mortarion, how he feels about the warp, what secrets Malcador tells him as well, and what does he do with these beliefs. The warp is sorcery. When confronted by a demon, we draw on a demonology by Chris Wright. Our tale begins on the world called Karathalion. This was a library world operated under the eyes of distant masters on Prospero, Mortarion's ship positioned above the planet. The placid people of the planet had never witnessed the full firepower of a Legion fleet before, and so they could hardly be blamed for not knowing what to expect. They were still looking up into the skies when the bombardment began, turning the skies white as the clouds boiled away. Mass drivers annihilated the outer ring of defences before pinpoint land strikes destroyed every command and control node across the northern hemisphere. A rain of incendies ripped through the urban centres, falling for hour upon hour in an unrelenting barrage that left barely one stone standing atop the next. Sheets of promethium flame swept through what little remained, scorching it black. The books burned. Now that's heresy in my mind. Millennial tombs that had been secured in vacuum chambers were ripped apart as the armor-glass casings shattered. Archives became white-hot tunnels, atomizing irreplaceable volumes in puffs of burning dust. Then the Marines of Mortarion fell in drop pods, and the survivors hunted down by them. And Mortarion just tells his legion to find it. A female survivor is unlucky enough to run into Mortarion, and she sees he was massive, far bigger in the flesh than she had ever conceived he might be, radiating an aura of such astonishing psychic authority that it made her want to gasp out loud. The elements themselves seemed to shear away from him, though his scythe's energized blade ran with boiling rainwater. She wanted to look away, but the yellowed eyes held her fast. He walked slowly towards her, looming through twisting palls of smog, cracking the road surface under his heavy tread. He grabs her and says, "I have it." Then we go back in the past to a meeting between Malcador and Mortarion on Terra 70 years earlier. Mortarion says the Emperor tries his patience. He wants to see him. Malcador says Mortarion will join his legion soon. Mortarion turned on him, his eyes flashing with frustrated anger. "Then why imprison me here? Did he do this to any of my brothers?" Malcador noticed the edge of unreason in his guest's face and wondered if it was getting worse. All the gene progeny of the great project had been damaged by the scattering, but Mortarion's wounds ran deeper than most. Angon had been physically damaged, and Curz's mind had sunken into darkness, but Mortarion seemed to have inherited some of both afflictions, and perhaps with Malcador being a psyker, the psychic damage that he sees there within Mortarion. Mortarion says to the Sigillite, "You talk of the imperial truth, and yet you are neck-deep in witchery." He grimaced beneath his rebreather, making the skin around his temples wrinkle. "I can smell it on you. As soon as I leave your presence, you will be back at your spellbook." Mortarion, in his anger here, clearly doesn't comprehend that he has his own psychic signature, as described earlier in this video. Mortarion points out an 8-sided gate with symbols, and the Sigillite says the Emperor has many projects. The Primarch nodded. He does. He starts many things and discards them when they no longer keep his interest. There are times when I think he may have started too many, and that they will come back to haunt him. "There is a purpose," Malcador replied. "A design. Some things he's able to explain now, and some he will explain later. All we ask, all we have ever asked, is for a little trust." Mortarion grabs him and says, "Malcador is foul, a sorcerer," and Mortarion states that "I will never serve in your crusade while there are witches among us." Malcador says he can show him something that might change his mind. Then back on with the witch hunt. The woman, Lamenta, is shackled before Mortarion. She says, "You lowered the planet to find me." Mortarion says some of it was for his soul to purify it. That sort of death purifies him. "For a long time," he said, "I believed what my father told me, my new father. I told myself that you were a myth. Well, you can see that's not true." "I see a mortal woman," Mortarion said. "I could snap your neck with my fingertips. Such a charmer. How long have you been down here with them?" 25 years, she replied. "And the mortal you consumed?" "I forget. I can't ask her anymore." She quickly lost her mind. "Why were you sent?" "I was not sent," Lamenta snapped. "I chose it. There were priceless things down there, and now you have destroyed them all. Your brother Magnus will be angry when he returns." "Do not speak to me of my brothers, any of them." Mortarion was studying her intently, Close up, Lamenta could smell the chemical tang of his armor's systems, the ripe edge to his extruded breath. She could see the minuscule darts of his pupils and the faint hidden spasms around his mouth. "You are foul to me," he pronounced at last. Lamenta bowed as much as her bonds would let her. "Yet you are nothing less than astonishing to me. I am full of admiration. Truthfully, I did not expect to endure long enough to see you at such quarters." The flattery made no impact. Mortarion's psyche was so inured to disdain that he could no longer see anything other than veiled contempt in others. Lamenta could almost hear that paranoia echoing in his mind, pursuing him, dragging at his mighty wounded soul. "My brothers are already using your kind," Mortarion told her. "They tell me Lorgar willingly infects his warriors, and there is Fulgrim." Mortarion shuddered. "I wonder at it. The hypocrisy. You should not. They have seen the order of nature and accepted it." Mortarion smiled joylessly. Behind the rebreather, he turned, gesturing to the collection of esoterica in his chambers. "These are wards," he said. "Protections against the dark. Sorcery is a cancer. We must guard against it, push it back. I surround myself with all that is not the warp, for it is hateful to me. Whatever remains is corruption. I seek it out, I destroy it. And yet," said Lamenta, "of all that world's souls, you chose to preserve me." Mortarion's right eyelid twitched. "For now." "Why?" He drew close again, and it was all Lamenta could do not to shrink back in her bonds. "I am surrounded by the damned," he said. "Jagatai was right. I am on my own with them. The ether stains everything, and I will understand it, and I will overcome it." "Oh, for pity. Nothing can overcome it," she said. The Primarch loomed over her, and his shadowed face boiled with an old resentment. "All things can be overcome," he. "Your final task, demon, is to show me how." Then we return to Malcador and Mortarion. And Malcador is speaking to the Death Guard Primarch. "You tell me you will refuse to serve if psychic potential remains in the legions," said Malcador, watching the view continue to expand. "I believe you. It has been at the forefront of the Emperor's mind for many generations. There are complexities to overcome, but much of his labour has been expended on that very question. This is a part of it." And Mortarion sees the Emperor's Webway project. Malcador explains how it will mean no warp travel, no need for psychers. He then mentions a place called Nicaea. "You are valued, Mortarion. You will be mighty, as strong as the bones of the earth, and a pillar of your father's vision." Malcador dared not reach out to him to rest a hand on the Primarch's colossal wrist. "Remain true to us, and he will give you this. You will speak there to make your case before the eyes of the entire Imperium, to unburden yourself of the things that you now carry unaided. For now we must build an empire with forbidden tools, but a day will come when all things are no longer necessary." "Tell me more," Mortarion said. We then return to Malcador and the demon. The Primarch says, "I have learned many things," gesturing to the arcane objects strewn across the floor. "Your kind can be warded against, you can be bound, you can be used like blades, and then sent back to the hells that spawned you." Lamenta felt like laughing in his face. She had heard the same screeds from 1,000 other mortals over the eons, each one convinced that he alone had found a way to negotiate with the gods for no price at all. "Let me tell you of the Imperium," she said. "There are many great forces in the ether, and one of them has your name etched over its rusting throne. He's waiting, but not for very much longer. It matters not how many trinkets you rattle or wave, he will not be denied. He has claimed you." "None have claimed me," snarled Mortarion. "Even my father could not claim me, who was guilty of patricide long before the seeds of treachery were sown in the War Master's heart. I have seen them all off, the tyrants, the witches, the Xenos filth. Only I remain, pure of it all, free of corruption." And you can see within his speech there, Mortarion's claim to have outlived and outlasted everything, to overcome everything as he sees it. You can see within that a seed which grandfather Nurgle can corrupt, so that he can endure and overcome everything, but to also be tainted with the sorcery that he once railed so strongly against. "You do not look pure to me," the Primarch glowered. "I can compel you, demon. I know the words, the numerical constants that bind you, dragging you from one form to another. I have studied these things. It is not witchery, but scientific reason." Lamenta felt real contempt then. The damaged figure before her had no true knowledge, just false hopes and gleanings. Her own master's favourite, Magnus. Now, there was one who really understood the mysteries of the Imperium, and even he had been deceived. "You wish to know the truth?" she asked. Mortarion came closer. "I will know the truth," he hissed. "I can show it to you. I destroyed a world to find you. Give me the knowledge." Lamenta smiled sweetly. Very well. Exerting her power was trivially easy. Most of the wards and cantrips Mortarion had assembled to keep her in place were embarrassingly weak, and only one thing in the chamber had the power to really hurt her. This is the truth. Her bonds shattered, her human shell peeled away, sloughing off from her like a bloody cloak, and revealing a glossy insectoid true form, she launched herself at the Primarch, her jaws gaping obscenely, her claws raking. They struggle. Then he invokes the runes which bound her form. She says that Mortarion could not resist using the powers of the warp. The glorious stink of learned sorcery and hedge magic was now pungent and inescapable. It was within him, and he was using it in spite of every protestation. Then Malcador tears her apart, and as she departs back into the warp, she says, "Hail, Master of the Plague!" She cried through the ruin of her jaws. "By the gods, you learn fast." And then the mortals of the universe ripped away, and the warp came rushing over her like a tide. Mortarion stood over Lamentor's crushed form, breathing heavily. He could smell the ichor upon his gauntlets. It wasn't blood. However, it stained just as richly. His heart was beating as one, though the combat had sickened him. He wanted to vomit, to expel the curdling sickness that hung heavily in his stomach. But here was something else there too. He remembered Malcador's promises, the smooth words spoken, so it seemed, an age ago. A day will come when all these things are no longer necessary. The Sigillite had been wrong about that, either lying or mistaken. That day would never come, and there was no point pretending otherwise. Perhaps all the old certainties would have to be overturned now, even the oldest, forged in the gas clouds of the foundling world. He had both loved and hated. He remembered, too, the words that he had spoken. "I will serve in your crusade, but only when there are no witches among us." For too long he had been used by all sides. Nicaea had been and gone, and the promises made for it had all been hollow. The void now seethed with witchery, more virulent than ever, and he could feel its tendrils grasping for him. He looked down on the edged floor at the wards and the symbols and the runes. He would have to learn more. He would have to master all the paths of ruin. He would, as perhaps he had known for a long time, now have to become the very thing that he always hated. "So be it," he growled, retreating back to the centre of the arcane circle. "It starts here." And on that note, friends, we'll wrap up today's video as we get some interesting insight into the double sides of the sour puss Mortarion, how he rails against sorcery and yet still uses it himself, even early on,